said. I would now, with great pleasure and respect, invite Colonel Patrick Stockton, Canada's first Veterans Ombudsman, to speak to the issues confronting our Afghanistan veterans. Colonel Stockton.
Thank you, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, serving members of the Canadian Forces and the RCMP, fellow veterans, and most importantly, families of our veterans. It's both an honor and a privilege for me to have been asked to say a few words today to mark the occasion of the 68th anniversary of the Allied landings on the beaches of Normandy, D-Day. Juno Beach and the battles that ensued in the liberation of Europe was no small accomplishment for our small Canadian Army. Much like the pivotal role of Canada's conquest of Vimy Ridge in our contribution to World War I, Canada's contribution to Operation Overlord and the battles that followed proved vital for eventual victory in World War II. I would submit, however, that it's as important for us to pay homage to those who landed on the beaches and ultimately freed the world from Nazi tyranny as it is to use occasions like this to help heal the scars of war and to ensure that we continue to live up to the lessons that we learned from the blood, suffering, and sacrifice of those Canadians who went off to war. I'd like you to imagine for a minute a scene in some small Canadian town in a bus terminal. There's a lineup of buses waiting with their doors open, a lineup of large cargo trucks being loaded with all kinds of army gear. Hundreds of soldiers are scurrying about, carrying out all sorts of preparations. They're lined up having the roll call. They're loading equipment on the buses, or on the trucks rather. They're saying goodbye to families, friends, and loved ones, and the throngs of people who turn out regularly to see them off because their nation's soldiers are going off to war. As you think about this scene, with all its confusion, the energy, the emotions involved, I'd like you to focus your thoughts for a moment on the image of one small family. There's a young lady, clearly very upset, but trying to hold things together. She's holding a young boy in her arms, 2 or 3 years old. So young, he doesn't really understand what's going on. He's just enthralled with all the activity. Clinging to her waist is a little girl, 4 or 5 years old. She knows what's going on. The tears are very real, and the sobs are very deep and heartfelt. And then there's Dad. He's in his combat fatigues. He goes, throws his rucksack on a truck and his duffel bag. And then he comes over to give his family one last hug and a kiss goodbye. Now everybody's in tears. Mom, Dad, the little girl, and even the little boy who doesn't know what's going on. He just knows something bad is about to happen. All of a sudden, the regimental sergeant major bellers out, get on the trucks, get on the buses. There's one last group hug before Dad disappears on his bus with his comrades. Ladies and gentlemen, Dad's going to war. It seemed like Dad's gone forever. The family communicates as much as possible, and Mom tries to shelter the kids from the news just in case it happens to be bad. She tries real hard to keep life as normal as possible for her kids, although it is in fact far from normal for any other Canadian family. And perhaps for them, life will never be normal again. Dad comes home, finally, and family life seems to be perfect again. Everyone's so excited and thankful that Dad wasn't one of the fallen in the battlefield or one of the ones that came home maimed on the field of battle. But he's not the same Dad that said goodbye to his family months or years earlier. In fact, the demons of war have come home with him, and now those very demons of war will torture everyone in that family for the next generation. What war it is that Dad went off to, the one that you're conjuring up in your own mind, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether it was a scene from World War I, a scene from World War II, Korea, or the war in Afghanistan. It doesn't matter if the war that Dad went off to, he was just being a so-called peacekeeper. War is hell. Soldiers die, and lives are ruined regardless of whose war we send our mothers and fathers, our sons and daughters, regardless of whose war we send our friends and families and fellow Canadians to fall victim to. Lives are ruined of the people we send to war and of their families. But it's business as usual for the people who sent them. Lives are ruined, but it's business as usual for the politicians and bureaucrats who themselves are responsible for sending so many of our young people and their families straight to hell. And the business of these politicians and senior bureaucrats is to get their own way, regardless of who they hurt along the way. If they really cared for our country as much as the men and women who volunteer to fight for this country, they wouldn't send their young people off to wars that they can't win. If they really cared about our country, they would care for those citizens who sacrificed everything for the country they love, who sacrificed everything for a government that they placed all of their faith and loyalty in. But today, sadly, we see that faith and loyalty has been terribly misplaced, because instead of being cared for and appreciated by the government that they made huge sacrifices for, they have been cheated, abused, lied to, and ultimately treated as a liability. The situation is so deplorable that, as you've heard, veterans have been forced to take the government to court just to be treated fairly. And recently, in the case of Dennis Manouge versus the Government of Canada, veterans have won a class action suit against the government that they loyally serve. As you heard, there's another one with Equitas coming out of Vancouver, and there are more down the pipe where veterans just want to be treated the way a grateful nation should be treating them. Shame on the Government of Canada for forcing their veterans to take such extreme measures just to be treated fairly. The lives of many of our veterans and their families have been ruined serving us, you and me. And while they're continually being abused by the Government of Canada, we show our thanks by showing our indifference. It's time that all Canadians demanded a change. Because it shouldn't be business as usual for our politicians and senior bureaucrats in this town who surround themselves with a wall of deceit and selfishness and arrogance and depravity. Mr. Harper, tear down this wall. Tear down this wall that stands between you and Canadians, this wall of lies and self-interest. Too many of our veterans have lost limbs, and too many young Canadians have had their lives ruined serving us. Yet they're treated as inconsequential pawns in the perverted game that is politics. Mr. Harper, tear down this wall and start acting like a responsible leader by treating your veterans and their families with the respect and compassion that they earned. No difference from those veterans who served our nation in another era on the beaches of Normandy. Yeah. So on this, the 68th anniversary of D-Day, let us be thankful that there are Canadians who were and continue to be prepared to make such huge personal sacrifices to preserve the Canadian way of life. And for all of our D-Day veterans and those who fell on the battlefield on this day in 1944, let us all resolve not to merely pay them the lip service of remembrance. Let us strive to live the lesson of service before self that they demonstrated so ably on the Juno Beach, on the beaches of Normandy, the battlefields of Europe, and then back here at home as they return to every walk of life and continue to demonstrate service before self right here throughout their lives after the war. We will remember them.